Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. There are 75 days until November 7th. This week, we'll be checking in on the Kentucky political news of the week. We're going to chat with Adrielle Camuel, the Democratic candidate for the 93rd House District. Then Nato calls us all to action with the Kernels of Truth premiere of his new song, It's Andy for Kentucky. I tell you, folks, this is an episode you don't want to miss. But first, are you ready to help turn Kentucky purple? While political ads are trying to convince you that Andy Beshear is soft on crime, against churches, and single-handedly forcing your child to be transgender, the wave of negative ads are designed, people, to keep folks tuned out and disgusted with our political system. These are not efforts to inform and inspire deeper interest and engagement. We are not going to fix what's wrong with Kentucky with these ads or with this approach. That's why Progress Kentucky is very excited to be a part of the Kentucky Future Project. Kentucky Future Project was coming together progressive groups to build the political coalition of new voters, progressive voters, non-white voters who can come together to make our Commonwealth better. So we're working with great groups like Planned Parenthood, the Fairness Campaign, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Hood to the Holler, and many others to turn out the new Kentucky majority and achieve better electoral outcomes for our Commonwealth. If you want to support our efforts within this coalition, please make a donation at our secure Act Blue website. $5, $50, $500. It all adds up. It'll give us the materials we need to make a positive difference on November 7th. And remember, as an all-volunteer group, none of your money would go to consultants or salaries. It just goes to the resources we need to do the work and to make the difference. So please do consider making a donation. All right, so let's now check in with our co-hosts. Let us know who you are, where you are, what's your protest sign say today. You there on the internet, we mean you as well. We want to read what your sign says. Put it in the chat while we are sharing ours. I'm Aaron. I'm coming to you from Childsburg, which isn't really a city. It's just, a subdivision. And my it's a subdivision of Lexington, just to be clear. Place myself a little bit more. Jacobson Park, if you're familiar with Jacobson Park, just keep driving. And then there's a sea of vinyl siding. My house is one of those. All right, so my sign says today, it's stolen from Will Rogers. It says, I am not a member of an organized political party. I am a Democrat. All right, let's turn to our co-host this fine, fantastic week. Willie Carver, are you there?
I am here coming at you live from Mount Sterling in Montgomery County, Kentucky. Aaron, that is entirely too many words, and you're going to have to print that sign in like 12 font, and no one's going to read it, and you just cost someone the election. So I want mine to just say truth / politics, i.e. truth over politics. I think it's closely related to your protest sign. I know we're all frustrated right now, and I know that when we talk about what politics means, it's really about having a vision of what should be, and then having a plan for how that vision comes to fruition, right? Ideally by engaging other people. And I am uninterested in engaging people if that engagement isn't authentic and, tied to truth in its purpose. So that's my sign for the week. We win through truth conquers.
Nice. That's awesome. Thanks, Willie, and good to see you. Nate, are you there?
I'm here. Heidi ho, neighbors. It's Nato Orshan. When he plays out, he goes by Nato and then starts referring to himself in the third person. Broadcasting live and direct from lovely South Frankfurt. Kids in my home. And my little spoiler of a song that will be debuting later tonight. My sign is, who's got no time for fearful haters? Who respects our educators? It's Andy.
Nice. So excited to listen to that song one more time. And if you guys missed it, if you were not in, thank you, Annabel. If you missed it this weekend, if you weren't able to make it to Pivot and hear the live premiere, we wanted to make sure you didn't miss out completely. So very, very glad that Nato is graciously going to grace us with his presence this evening and play the song. So, all right. And you got to pay attention because all the lyrics are phenomenal. And it is really quite, it's the opposite of these political attack ads I was just railing on about. This is like informative, good information coming your way.
Y'all, I have, speaking of those, clearly won the algorithm race. I've not heard a single negative ad yet. I only see them when like some progressive news source cites them and talking about how appalling they are. But I have yet to actually see one. I only see the one where that sheriff from Floyd County talks about how great Andy is, or the one where that teacher talks about how great he is. I've seen no other ads for any other person.
Hey,
that's amazing.
I'm happy.
You are absolutely winning the algorithm race. That's amazing. I just, I watch local news from time to time, not constantly, but like local news. I like to find out, what's caught on fire recently. And they always have, I can't even, when they launch the attack ad, I can't tell who it's going against, because they all sound the same. And I'm not sure, is this a Cameron's horrible, or is this a Beshear's horrible?
Unless it starts transgender children.
Yeah, right.
That's where it's going.
Fucking pathetic. Sorry, I think I just dropped the F-bomb. It is. It's the political footballs. Just tragic to see. Who they're punching down on in our society right now. Yeah. Right. It's just really, really frustrating and disgusting. So, but yeah, not enlightening. Not a lot of light. Just a lot of heat. Light. Yeah. All right. So speaking of news, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of important stories. This one I thought was worth sharing. It's about the big money that is backing Cameron. So a new look at who's behind some of the PACs that are behind some of these attack ads we were just discussing. So a pro charter school billionaire is putting millions behind the liar Dan Cameron. This is a story that comes to us from the Kentucky Lantern, our favorite paywall-free news source. Jeff Yass, who is a Philadelphia-based billionaire stockbroker. So, he's really done something good for the world. He's a stockbroker that's earned $1 billion. Earned is really, doing a lot of work on that sentence. But he's a libertarian, of course, and he's a big Rand Paul backer. So he is the primary supporter of a couple of PACs that are now attacking Andy Beshear, a super PAC linked to Paul called the Protect Freedom PAC. The other one is a super PAC called School Freedom Fund. Yass makes up 73% and 92% respectively of those two PACs' total contributions. So really, they're kind of a one billionaire show, but they're doing a lot of work for Dan Cameron. They're pumping, really millions of dollars into these attack ads. So first reported in the Lexington Herald that the Protect Freedom group was working on a combined $5 million digital television, mail, and Geo TV advertising program in Kentucky. So $5 million just to take down Andy. And that's because, they want charter schools. they want to elect a guy that is really into charter schools. And so I guess that's, we can put two and two together there and figure out that they want Cameron to be in the governor's mansion so that he can help them get charter schools through the legislature, signed into law, figure out the right way to get it past the state Supreme Court, which has blocked it so far. But it's really just pathetic. It's disgusting. And Rand Paul, is the guy that's kind of inspired all these folks to get involved, which is really, tells you kind of all you need to know, really. So that's, as we think about these ads and where they come from, these aren't hometown funds, folks. These aren't folks who have a real vested interest in helping make our Commonwealth better. They're just looking for a political opportunity, and that's for sure. That's what they found with Dan Cameron, a political opportunist. So it's a match made in libertarian hell, really, because they want to bring it to our state, which has been, one of the, I think, real strong voices against the charter school movement, and we've worked really hard to keep that at bay, despite all the work of these Republicans and their mega donors. So Nate or Willie, I know you guys are proud public school advocates, public school funding advocates. Thoughts on this these ads and this billionaire backer?
I think of two things immediately. One is what we already know about charter schools, which is that they don't work. I think the last study I saw showed that the majority, and I would even go so far as to say it was closer to 70% of charter schools don't exist that are started, don't exist after just 10 years, or probably worse than that. That is lowballing that statistic, because they can't function, not really, if they're trying to work, because it takes so many resources to adequately care for children. So one, this is a beautiful, for them, it's a beautiful idea. Schools that are constantly failing, competition, let big businesses run it all, suck the money out of poor places. Two, I think this is clearly a target against teachers who managed to win an election in Kentucky and managed to give us a Democratic governor. So creating some system where they're barely making money, creating some system where they have no sense of security, creating a system where their voices are weakened and their power is taken, that's exactly what is going to continue allowing for more Republican wins, especially for all state elections.
Oh, and it's such a win-win, right? Because it's like they move to charter schools. There's no unions in charter schools, right? They can defund public schools with those, nasty teachers unions that make life harder for them, right? So it's like all their libertarian dreams come true in one horrible policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also just eroding public's ability to hold them accountable. So it's just it's bad policy. We got to fight at every turn for sure. But this billionaire from Philadelphia is absolutely not making things easier for us. Nate, what about you?
Yeah, it's funny. So on the drive home tonight, I think I told this to you, Aaron, a little earlier. I was listening to the my old Kentucky podcast, which I highly recommend. And we're not in competition. They're just amazing. You should listen to them as well as us every week. But Robert and Jasmine had Kate Turner on this week. Kate's actually sitting in for Jasmine, and she's the one who ran for the House in District 33 last year. It didn't win, but she's got some great experience. Anyway, they were talking about education and comparative education packages and everything, and talking about how Cameron is all pro charter school, and she talked about a friend of hers who got out of college and started teaching in a local charter school. And what she said is that the guy said that they would pretty much only hire Teach for America people, right? Because they're kind of pliable and not expensive and all this kind of stuff. And that was their sort of almost business plan, that they were just going to keep churning through Teach for America teachers. And I love Teach for America, and I love that concept. But the notion that you'd have a school that's sort of that's its backbone is a really crappy way to bring up and teach kids. So anyway, just sharing that with the audience.
Excellent. So yeah, definitely lots of education news happening right now. We've actually got the next story is about education funding. So Willie, take it away.
Sure. And let me try to summarize this history, which starts in 1891, as quickly as I can. So back in 1891. So what I think is really interesting is these things that we call progressive or liberal. And then we say, oh, I wish we had those old-fashioned values. Well, in the old year of 1891, Kentucky ratified its constitution and said that the General Assembly, by legislation, will provide for an efficient, that word's important, system of common schools throughout the state that would be funded at the state level, establishing basically a pretty socialist idea, right? That the state would take care of something and ensure that every citizen had access to this efficient education. That side note, that very same year, 1 month later, they also said that money may not be used for church, sectarian, or denominational schools at all, and no money raised for any school shall be used in any way for a church. Again, this was 1891, and now we're having people try to fight for old-fashioned values by giving public money. Old-fashioned American values are separating religion and the state so that religion can be kept holy and not muddled by the state, and vice versa. So I say all this to say that in 1989, and this is a history lesson for some of you know all about this, the Rose decision was issued. So effectively, Rose versus Council for Better of Education in 1989 argued that our system of education was not equal or common because there was such a discrepancy between the poorest students in the state and the richest students in the state. And they came up with 7 caveats for what it would look like if schools were equal and what students should have access to, what every student in the state of Kentucky should be getting. So enough oral and written communication to function in a complex society. That's one. Sufficient knowledge of economic, social, and political systems so that kids can make informed choices. That's out the window since we're actually making it illegal to talk about certain political concepts because they're political. Understanding of government processes to enable them to understand what affect their state. Again, we're making it illegal to learn these things. Jamie Raskin's book was banned. It was on the Krauts list and banned in certain places in Texas because it taught students the judicial system. Self-knowledge of mental and physical wellness, which again is slowly being eroded and banned. We now have lots of rules about who can get mental health care in school and who can't. And we are overriding existing doctors' beliefs and attitudes and science about how mental health works by doing things that actually harm people. Sufficient grounding in the arts to be able to appreciate your own cultural and historical heritage. Again, we're banning the cultural heritage of LGBTQ people, of Black people, and brown people across the state. Sufficient preparation to be smart and be able to get a job if you so choose, or continue on an education. And when we list all these things, we see that we're not really getting access to these things at all. All right. In 1989, we saw that there was a major issue because of the funding model that was giving a lot more money to certain kids in the state and a lot less money to other kids in the state. And so these 7 principles were established as the guiding principles that every school should have. There's a couple of other caveats that I won't even get to, but basically it is the General Assembly's responsibility to ensure that every student in the state has adequate education that meets those 7 goals. And they have a constitutional right to that adequate education. The Rose case came about in 1989 because we saw that we didn't have it. In fact, the difference in spending per child in 2023 dollars in 1989 was $3,489 per student. That's this time's money, right? If you are like me and remember going to the school in the 90s, I remember there being a computer, a giant computer lab. I remember it in the early 2000s having a computer for every single child in the science classroom. It is 2023. Computers are a lot cheaper and we still don't have that. The schools that I've worked at, we don't have access to computers at all. We have to make complex schedules just to do basic things because we're all sharing these resources. And if you look at the data, and the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy did look at the data, we are now seeing a larger discrepancy in spending per pupil in the richest and the poorest students than we saw in the time when we ruled that it was unconstitutional. The difference is now $3,902 between the poorest and the richest districts. Any other metric that we can even try to use to measure this shows exactly the same thing. That basically since the year 2000, we have seen a larger difference between the poorest and richer students. On behalf funds, so funds that are given to things that aren't directly related to education, but are tangential, like which teachers go to which districts. Larger districts get way more than that as well because they're able to pay higher. If we look at the total amount of money owed versus the difference, that is 58% in 1990, 14%. So the difference was so small in 1997, we've gone back up to 42%. And what we see by analyzing this is that the Republican legislatures have cut corporate taxes and they've frozen education spending. And what that does is forces local taxes to try to make up the difference. In 2018, for the first time since CARA was enacted, local support actually is higher than state support. in these schools. So that means that local districts is in very poor places are having to contribute more than the actual state is contributing, because instead we're allowing big businesses not to pay taxes to make up for that. And it's a pretty frightening difference when we look at what work has to be done to make up that deficit. In 2013, the poorest places in Kentucky would have, if they enacted a tax, it was 1 penny for every, I think, $80 worth of property. And we compare that to the richest districts in the state. The richest districts were getting 10 times more money than the poorest districts trying the exact same thing. What we see then is that conservative politics are harming education. They're really harming poor children, not only in the financial aspect, which is, again, worse than it was when we sued because it was illegal, but we also see that some of the social policies are also clearly unconstitutional. This decision, what's particularly nice about it is that it was a state level decision, not a federal level decision. So that means we can approach this from the state constitution, and the state constitution ensures a common, equitable, fair, free education. And we've seen in the past that we were able to make sure that our poorest children in Kentucky are protected. Right now, they are not. So yeah, that's sort of where we are right now. I knew that the numbers were going to be damning. I had no idea how damning.
Yeah, that is staggering that we're back to the point that the disparities are worthy of lawsuits, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Beyond worthy of lawsuits, evidently.
Weird. After you put the GOP supermajority in charge for a few years to see what happens.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works. It's like
thank you for the lesson, Willie.
Yes.
When do we get the quiz? Because I feel like I definitely was just in class with Willie, who, lifelong educator. He's getting out his teaching Jones here with us tonight.
I have my first live classes this semester since I quit teaching. Maybe I'm leaning into that a bit hard, but I love it.
That's awesome. So thank you for that. Nate, any thoughts before we move on?
I mean, it's just the same. It's the same old points over and over again, but they need to be made. Like the point of public education is to have as well informed and capable a citizenry as possible. And it's not individual communities that should be doing that, and it's not wealthy parents that should be doing it. It's the state, it's the federal government, it's the bigger structures that have an interest in having a well-informed, educated and capable citizenry. And I'm not going to say anything original here, but if your focus is to reduce taxes, we end up with what we see with those kinds of charts, with huge disparities between the poorest communities and the wealthiest, and we saw this, in other states too. Like I'm thinking Vermont, where there was a legislation that tried to equalize it, sort of in the name of equity, and that's a wonderful thing. But that needs to be finessed a little bit too, because what ends up happening is the wealthier communities, are sort of, wait a second, you're going to reduce the amount of money per student that we're spending, and in some cases that was actually true. And so you get this kind of dynamic where, would it be equitable for the biggest city to raise more taxes on its own in order to make up the difference? You could argue that back and forth. This is not the right forum, but the point is that the equity issue is real. The equity issue is hurting our kids and hurting our Commonwealth right now. And so I guess in closing, taxes for education are good. We should all want to be taxed, and the wealthiest tax more to pay for public education. Thank you for joining the TED Talk.
I just love that this idea that the state should organize this in a fair way for all people would be called communist hooey by people with Trump flags. But the truth of the matter is, you are citing something that was written in 1891 in the South.
Yeah.
The Commonwealth Manifesto, really, right? Like, well known for our socialist leanings, 1891 Kentuckians. Yeah, no, like they got it right back then. Let's not F it up. Let's go fix it. And make sure these schools have the resources they need so that kids aren't trapped on school buses for hours. And, oh, wait. Oh, right. Yeah, that was Andy Beshear that was going to fully fund the transportation budgets for all the schools. And that was the GOP supermajority that said, no, we're not going to do that. But yeah, big champions of public education, Dan Cameron and his pals, right?
Listen, I'm in favor of eliminating commas altogether and taking the years we spend trying to teach them and just teaching how the legislative and executive branches work. I think we get a lot more bang for our buck. Swiss French just eliminated past tense participle agreement because no one masters it and they have to work so hard at it. So they were like, you know what, we're done. So they changed the language entirely so that they didn't spend time on it. And just think of the time we would get back if we stopped.
Just think of, yeah. A little bit Orwellian in some senses, but
come for the Kentucky politics, stay for the French language construction information. That's what we like to say. All right, so I think we're gonna move on to talk to our guest. This is very exciting. So again, I'm gonna refer to our event on Saturday at Pivot, our in-person campaign launch kickoff. But one of the fantastic speakers, in addition to Willie and myself and music by Nato, was Adrielle. So Adrielle Camuel is running for the 93rd district. The 93rd district, which is here in Lexington. It is a very weird shaped district. It has been gerrymandered all to heck, but it is, it's an important part of our city, even if I can't really pick it out on a map because it moves all over the place. And obviously really important that we have somebody in that seat, which is not a give me Democrat seat, right? It's like our dear friend Lamine Swann won it, but it was not a lock for the Democrats. Like, he had to work really hard. It's a closer district than others. Well, not as close as Sherilyn Stevenson's, but that's another story. But yeah, it's a competitive district, and so really important as we think about Lamine's legacy, that we have a candidate that is fighting to maintain that and further it. So through that process, we have Adrielle Camuel, a longtime party kind of person, like, who's been in the streets and in the trenches and knocked more doors than probably about anyone. And really glad to have her with us this week. Adrielle, how are you? We're gonna need to unmute you so we can hear you. Can we do that? She can do it. She has the power. There you go.
Sorry.
No problem. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Just learning a little history, little education history.
It was really quite fascinating, to be honest.
We like to, educate our listeners and viewers. Well, Willie does. I just like to talk smack. That's what I'm here for.
Nate, when I interviewed for an English position in Rutland, Vermont, at I don't know, 23 soaking wet, they were like, Willie, the Rose case and the subsequent care of reform radically shifted Kentucky education. Can you speak to its value and how you, like, I was like, I am 23. That happened when I was in third grade, but luckily my teachers complained a lot about it. So I was able to use it.
Oh my goodness.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right. So Adrielle, talking about, Lamine's legacy and his work and his, organizing for civil rights and his kind of historical and long-term engagement in the political process, an organizer. What about, kind of that opportunity? What inspired you to throw your hat in the ring for the 93rd?
Oh gosh. There are a lot of things. Sorry, I'm going to take one out of my ear because I feel like I'm yelling in my head. So I'm just going to place one of these earbuds down. So I have worked on campaigns. I I've said this several times, so it's probably old news to all of you and anybody listening. The very first campaign I ever worked on was Bill Clinton's in 1992. And it goes, I don't, is it an infatuation with politics? I'm not sure. Like, it actually started my freshman year in college at the University of Louisville. I was certain I was either going to major in psychology or somewhere in business. And every freshman was required to take an orientation class, Campus 101, whatever. And my professor happened to be the incredible Phil Lemley. Like, I really lucked out. And anybody who's roughly of my age, that ever saw Dr. Lemley give a speech, like, they knew him for his biscuit speech, and it's a really long story, but it ends with him like throwing, the twist and pop like dough and like throwing it against a wall and saying, don't be be engaged in college. Don't be like that dough on the wall. So we were talking in class and everybody was talking about what they thought they would major in. And when I said psychology or business, he was like, no, you're political science. I was like, no, I'm not. And he was right. So I ended up with not 1 degree in political science, but 2. He knew me very well. He knew me better than I knew myself. So anyway, so I got engaged, did work on tort reform, emerging democracies. I helped do some research on some books with that, and international conflict. But then, Bill Clinton was running for office in 92. He challenged the class, if we really wanted to learn about politics, we needed to get engaged from the ground floor, literally be boots on the ground. And so he said, there's a presidential candidate that's going to speak downtown. You need to be there. So I stood behind him. He was speaking in front of the Kentucky Center for the Arts. And there were a bunch of people from my political science classes down there. And I have to say, it was probably one of the most captivating speeches I had ever heard in my life. He was such an amazing speaker. I still think he is, but back then I was like, oh my gosh. So at the end, you walked up to a table if you felt compelled to help them. So I got a clipboard and I got a map and a list of names, and was basically like, oh yeah, go knock these doors. You're going to go to the Clifton area. And mind you, I am a little directionally challenged. It's just not my strong suit. There was no Google Maps. There was no GPS. There was nothing. So I went to Clifton, found the streets, and I walked and knocked. And that was it. I had a list of names and a clipboard in my hand, and that was it.
No minivan.
There was no minivan. Let me tell you, that would have been really helpful. But then you fast forward to all the way up to 2017. Actually, we have, Matt Bevin and, all the yucky things that were starting to happen in the legislature. The pro-wealthy and the yucky to everybody else. And what we were hearing at the time was about what I was hearing mostly, aside from attacks on pensions, we've got the pension tax, we've got right to work legislation being pushed through, or right to work for less, and repealing prevailing wage. I knew what the pensions were. I was not familiar with right to work at the time, and I didn't understand prevailing wage. I didn't know what it was. So January of 2017, I went with some friends who were really engaged at the time, and we went to a union hall in Louisville. And it's driving me crazy because I've been trying to think of which hall it was. And I feel like we were really close to Preston Highway. It was anyway. But that's when I really started to understand exactly what was in store for us. We were getting ready for some, just hell was about to rain down on us as a state. So 2017, all of that goes through. 2018, I go to the first protest, the second protest, third protest, everything about pensions. Then we're standing there fighting trying to keep right to work from passing. I think solar bill, they were we were trying to push for solar. Republicans were pushing back on it. And sometime in early 2018, in a committee room, and I had spent the first 19 years in my house in another part of town in Stanley's district. And I had moved in 2017 into what was the 88th. And Robert Benvenuti was my representative. I went from bad to bad. And then when he decided not to run again, that's when Sherilyn Stevenson, stepped up. And so I was in a committee meeting, in a room waiting for the committee to start is what it was. And somebody told me that I needed to meet her. So I, introduced myself, and she introduced herself, and found out that I was in her district. I was like, oh, like a woman, a Democrat? I might be represented by a female Democrat? All right, I'm in. And then later that night, because the session didn't end till almost, or that day didn't end till almost midnight. So then a group of us went, and we found a place open in Frankfurt to eat. And that's when Sherilyn and I discovered that she knows my sisters. Because they had gone to Morehead State, and she went to Morehead State. She had met my mother because my mother worked in the library. So anyway, all these weird family connections. So so I got involved. I jumped in. I was all in. I was going to do whatever it took to make sure that a Democrat won that seat, and I wanted that Democrat to be Sherilyn. She was brilliant, captivating. She spoke to everything that was important to me, and that's when I started canvassing the 88th, which is now the 93rd, and also I canvassed the 45th, which is also part of the 93rd, and a little bit of the 79th, which is now part of the 93rd. So I've been all over the place for years.
That's awesome.
I didn't know if I answered the question. That was like a real roundabout way to get to it.
So the answer is Bill Clinton, really. What is it?
For so many reasons. My master's thesis was on the underrepresentation of women in U.S. foreign policy structures, and all of that changed. Women started to move into the upper echelons during Bill Clinton's presidency. He was the one who started to promote women and push women because our voices weren't being heard.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for him in many, 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 many ways. He changed a lot of things. Like when you look at it from gender socialization, because I'm a little older than Willie. Doing the research for that, it was really quite fascinating about how things changed from, we'll just go with this, we'll just generalize it and say the 70s, until we moved into the realization of how gender socialization impacts people. And Bill Clinton really was the start of changing that so that women's voices were heard as in positions of power, authority, decision makers for U.S. foreign policy structures. Oh, yeah. So that's my story at the end.
Nice. Right. So we got to move on now.
Yeah, sorry.
We live in a soundbite driven society. After being asked both about LGBTQ equality and also Senate Bill 150, a soundbite of your response, which you said you were tired of the extremes of both sides, and then begin to speak about poverty and clean drinking water. That's been shared a lot. I know you've spoken about this before a couple of times, but I was wondering if you could flesh out that response for our viewers.
Yeah, no, and actually, I'm glad that you asked the question. So one of the things I'll say is, I want to make sure that actually there's two things to this, and I know we're limited time a little bit, but I just want to say that my positions on the LGBTQ plus rights are clear. However, I'll say it again. I have been a longtime supporter of the LGBTQ plus community, and that includes rights for transgender Kentuckians. And as a legislator, I will make it abundantly clear, I will always oppose any legislation attacking community members. And I feel that way for any minority group, any of our vulnerable Kentuckians. But getting to the question about fleshing out the statement about the extremes, right? If you listen to the interview, I wasn't asked about SB 150 because I wholly opposed that bill. And just a slight aside, and I think you all heard me talk about this as well. If you were ever lucky enough to be in my mass text network, throughout the session, at the beginning of the session, I start watching the bills and see the bills that will hurt vulnerable Kentuckians. it always overflows into education because I start with education, then look to see how it spills out. Those are the bills I track throughout the session. And then as we see bills move, so SB 150, HB 470, those were two that were like, as soon as they were released, they were on my radar. I sent out the alert to everybody. It's people in almost every school in our district. And I'm like, just FYI, these bills are coming. But when I see them moving, I let people know, then that goes out to their finger networks. Like it's just this big mass form of communication. That's why one reason texting is so great, but it's contact the message line. I always leave the number, support these bills, oppose these bills. So SB 150 and HB 470, as soon as they were out, and especially when, I didn't even get to see like the final version. I mean,
who did?
Nobody did. I know. I was like, wait, nobody did. Never mind. But I was telling people, flood the message line, flood the emails, like let them know that you stand against it. So I was always aware of, I knew that bill was happening. I was hopeful that it wouldn't come up, that it would get stopped in committee, that it would fall apart. It didn't, which is a tragedy for Kentuckians. But going back to the interview, if you go back and listen to the interview, I wasn't asked about SB 150. The question that I was asked is, will we see more culture war bills in the future? And I answered, unfortunately, I thought we would. And we know it's true. I mean, we're going to see those constantly. But for me, the term culture war applies to a broad range of issues. It's not just, a transgender issue, an LGBT issue. It's women's reproductive rights. It's racism. It's attacks on immigrants. It's, et cetera. Like you can just it's all these things, but they target groups that I care about. Like these are the kids in our schools. These are my neighbors. These are the people I see in the grocery store. So when I mentioned extremes, in my mind, I was thinking about culture wars in their entirety, like this broad spectrum. I was referencing the far right as well as Democrats, like the liberals who have a tendency to attack their own supporters instead of attacking GOP who bring up these culture war issues. And so to me, that type of behavior is extreme and it only helps Republicans and the far right. That's the nuts and bolts of it. It's just, I had a grand view in my head of what I was saying and did not communicate what I know to be true. Like it wasn't about, my comment had nothing to do with SB 150. It was about culture wars and how divisive it is.
Yeah, I will note that Kyle Whalen, your GOP opponent, was able to answer that question about the culture war issues by simply saying he hopes so in terms of the GOP moving on from anti-trans policy. That was it. On Bill Bryant went, stepping completely past the GOP agenda of hate and division, not asking Kyle Whalen to come down on SB 150. Also we learned that he's proudly anti-abortion, right?
I was just going to say,
right?
Really anti-woman.
Yeah. So that, he kind of got to just skate through his interview. It felt like to me, but so yeah, have you been on like Newsmakers, whatever the heck that show? Have you been interviewed by Bill Bryant a lot, Adrielle?
No, that's the first time I've ever done anything like that. I was a nervous wreck. Like in all sincerity, like I was like, sweating bullets. He was calm and cool, and he's fantastic. He's so nice, but I was like, deer in the headlights.
Well, clearly it went perfectly. So.
This reminds me of, so I got to meet the Bidens when I was teacher of the year, and a father reached out to me the night before. He has a child who is trans. This kid was going to school, and they decided to wear a little pin, a rainbow pin, for the first time that day. And the school told them they had to take it off and that it was inappropriate. So the kid was inconsolable. The father was inconsolable. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get President Biden to sign a card for this kid. We were told we were not allowed to bring anything into the meeting. So I have to hide the card in my jacket, and go past Secret Service and security. So when I get up to Jill Biden, I'm like, okay, here's my chance. So I pull the card out. Secret Service rushes. She like stops them. But the funny thing is, I have no idea what I said. I know whatever it was bad. I was like, me, teacher, and card and tape. Here's how I know it was bad, because afterwards she looks at me and she goes, Willie, is everything you want to communicate to me? Because I had also written a letter explaining the card, because I thought Secret Service would try to steal it. And she goes, is everything you're trying to say to me written in this letter? And I go, yes, ma'am. She takes it. But it had a happy ending. The president wrote that child an actual letter.
That's amazing.
But I know what happens to our brains.
I had said, when I left, I'm texting. Actually, no, I called my husband on the way home. I wasn't texting him. Sorry, I called him because he wasn't in school yet. And I said, I was so busy thinking about what I should have said to the previous question as I was answering the current question, and then answering the next question, thinking about the question I had just answered and what else I should have said. Like, there were so many things that I wanted to say that you get the lights, you get the camera, and I was just like, where do I look? I don't even know where I'm supposed to look. And he's like, you just look at me and you'll see. Like, I don't move my head. Like, I'm like, I will just look at you.
You'll get better at it, right? The key is, like, don't answer the question they ask. Answer the question you wanted them to ask. Acknowledge the one they asked, but then move on to the thing you really wanted to say, because
I'm learning.
So few
where
options.
Were you? Aaron, where were you? Where were you?
Consider this a practice session.
Come back on our show anytime and practice, that's for sure.
It makes sense now.
Could not be lower, Adrielle.
No.
Hey, but I have a Lexington question for you, because I know you've been knocking a lot of doors and talking to a lot of folks, and I'm sure that there's people who agree with you on a lot of issues and whatnot.
It's amazing here in the 93rd. Yes.
Oh, right on. No, that's wonderful. I'm just curious if there's any trends you're picking up on that you wouldn't have anticipated, like, more than two people talking about such and such. You're like, oh, wait, that's kind of, let me make a note of that.
Well, here's what I can tell you is one of the most common things I hear is they have no idea there's a special election on November 7th for the 93rd. And I feel like the news cycle is sometimes short. So many didn't know that Representative Swan had passed away. And so when I explain it to them, then, there's a quiet moment, and then they're ready to talk. But the things that are just the common themes that I hear from people are, like, they want to talk about women's reproductive rights. They want to talk about safe communities. They want to talk about access to healthcare. They want to talk about affordable housing. I mean, I have walked, like, anytime you all want to come knock doors or just walk with me as we talk to people, I invite you. Like, it is incredible. And I've walked in some areas that my heart absolutely breaks for people. And they want a livable wage. They want to be able to pay for their groceries. They want to pay for their utilities, and they want their kids to go to a good school. They want their kids to have better opportunities than they did. Like, it is, literally, these are the things we talk about. And for me, I think I've shared this. Well, I share it a lot because you don't know how hard it is until you go through it. Elder care, because I've knocked doors for a lot of older Kentuckians, and they express fears and concerns. There's some that know how lucky they are that they have got long-term care insurance. And they were lucky enough to get it, way back when. But it's traversing that whole, it's a chasm. I don't even know. Like, it is a maze of trying to figure out how to make sure, like, our aged Kentuckians receive the care that they need. And my dad with dementia, we are literally in the process of trying to find someplace that we feel is good for him, that he feels comfortable with, and it has an open room, apartment. It is really hard. And we have a lot of talks about that, because there are actually a lot of doors I've knocked, a lot of homes, a lot of apartments where it's multi-generations living in the same household because the child, same much generation like me, you've got your kids, but you've got your parents that you're taking care of living with you as well. So that's been, I've seen a lot. But on the bright side, there's a whole lot of fun dogs that you get to see. And I can tell you where Rusty lives because Rusty, I won't say the street, but Rusty doesn't need a collar, even though they have an invisible fence in his yard, because Rusty likes just his yard and he likes to yip at all the other. Like I learned all about Rusty. I learned about Rusty's brother.
That's what I tell all my canvassers, everyone I'm like getting ready to go out and knock doors. Like, I cannot guarantee you will meet a nice person, but I guarantee you will meet nice dogs.
All the dogs, all the dogs, they're just trying to get to you in a nice way.
All right. So I know, Willie, you've got a question.
This actually transitions perfectly because elder care is something that almost all of us are at some point going to have to face. And it's one of those issues where the fewer resources you have, the harder it is to really do. Even college students, one of my classmates had to ask if he could leave early because there was a gap in care for his mom and there was no one else to be there. Yeah. And so, when I think about Daniel Cameron's apology to teachers saying he's sorry that we got our feelings hurt, I think was the sum of it. And this whole whitewashing of their anti-education agenda, which is clearly anti-education. When we talk about childcare, the vast majority of Kentuckians support the idea of taxpayer money being used to provide more childcare. 72% of voters overall, the vast majority of Republicans, 63%, even support that kind of policy. I think I can guess where you stand on it, but what are your thoughts on this? And how do we win the messaging war to get people?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, yes, I support that 100%. Like the amount of money that is spent on childcare is staggering. But where my heart lies because I've been married to a 5th grade teacher. He's 27, just started his 27th year. But unequivocally, one way that we can bridge this gap or fill the space is funding universal preschool. We don't just need childcare. We don't just need daycare. If we have universal preschool, we can, first of all, it's a leg up for kids. It allows single moms and dads, because I did meet a single dad the other day and he said he understood, why I just said single moms, but single moms, they get back into the workforce. Family budgets, it loosens up family budgets. And it's the difference between intervention and prevention, or prevention and intervention is what I should have said. But it gives kids an opportunity to get the leg up on their education, but it levels the playing field as kids start their educational journey. But that's one way that we do it. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a relatively small cost. So I think we come at it from two different prongs. The 2-pronged approach is we get kids, 3 and 4 year olds, into universal preschool. We can get families back to work. But then as far as how do we win the messaging on taxpayer, on funding childcare? Well, I think one way that we do it is we know that we have an incredible surplus in our rainy day fund is huge. I think this may be an unpopular position, but I'm not a fan of cutting the income tax for the wealthiest Kentuckians and pushing taxes on really the most vulnerable Kentuckians who can afford it the least. But I think we have to be able to use tax appropriately so that we can use the funds to help our families, to help cover the cost of childcare. And again, it gets more people back into the workforce. We know that there are businesses everywhere looking for people to work because, at least here in Lexington, because we are growing. Everywhere you turn, we've got new houses going up, new apartments going up, new businesses opening. But if the cost of childcare is more expensive than what families can earn or can afford to pay, then we've got a problem. So we need a livable wage, and I would love to see us keep up with the consumer, the CPI, and get us up to $15, and then see where we go from there. But I think that I do think it's actually a multi-pronged approach. Willie, I don't know if I answered the question right, but
no, you absolutely did.
I was like, there's so many things.
Even your controversial idea that the super wealthy should pay.
I mean, call me crazy.
More than they're paying now, which won't even be close.
I'd like to think Amazon pays some taxes. I'll be honest. I mean, call me nuts.
You're one of those 1891, Commonwealth communists for sure.
That's right.
I was thinking about that when a friend of mine who has a book was having to pull the taxes up when he was selling at a booth, and I was thinking, Amazon sells so many of these books, and they don't have to worry about a single dollar. But he was having to turn away customers over taxes. Because they didn't have they had a 20, and the book plus tax was more.
Oh man.
Well, I think unless Nate, unless something's come to you and you want to ask a question, we've gone a little long, which we have a tendency to do, but we're so glad you've given your time to chat with us and hang out and answer some questions. And
I appreciate you having me. I really do, and you were right. You all were very nice. I will do better at interviews.
You heard it here first, folks.
Softball interviews from Progress, Kentucky. That is what we're known for.
It's still so nerve-wracking.
Oh no, you're so
really
cold natural.
Dozens of humans, Adrielle, will hear this. So
to all the humans, thank you.
So thanks again. What I do want to just say is, we mentioned Lamine Swan earlier. Big shoes to fill for sure. What he did to fight for civil rights, for access for all, for just fighting for the weakest folks in our society, right? He was very committed to those voices. I did want to mention Pam Dixon, his mom. Her birthday is this week, so happy birthday, Mom!
Happy birthday.
I met her the first event I did. I went to. I guess it's the second time I met Lamine, but it was a fundraiser that he did, and I sat down next to this woman, and she's like, that's my son, and she was so proud of him, and he was like, I don't know, she's just wonderful, and it's just tragic. The whole thing is just tragic for sure.
It's awful.
But I wanted to say, big shoes to fill. But it sounds like you're doing the walking in those shoes to get out there and knock on those doors and talk to as many people as possible, which is human. You got to do in these low awareness elections, right? People just, as you're saying, people just don't know what's happening.
Yes, and they don't. And I think in the political climate we're in, it's really hard for people to even want to stay engaged. I have so many people have said I can't watch the news, and I get it, and that's why I think it's critically important to get out and talk. I mean, when I knock their doors, I'm like, we have a special election, and I'm running, But I figure the best way to let you know is to knock your door and tell you about it, and then they're always willing to talk. Yeah. Or not always, usually. Sometimes they're in a hurry, but if they have a dog, they're
you get past the ring, ring doorbell or whatever.
I talk to all doorbells. I talk right into it because I'm assuming they're home, but they're just seeing who's there.
You just got to find yourself a Philly billionaire to cut you some big checks to go to a PAC that you can not coordinate with to buy you some ads.
Right. Oh gosh. Let's see. I wonder if I can find one. Where?
It's not a lot of billionaires in Kentucky, unfortunately. So if you actually know people in Kentucky, then you might not have as easy of a time as Rand Paul and his friends. All right, so we're moving on. Thanks again, Adrielle.
Thank you all.
We don't have that many days, 75 days to make this happen. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Let us hope it is not a freight train. So
oh gosh, right.
All right. So Nate,
yeah.
Are you ready? Are you ready to perform?
Am I ready? Well, I got my guitar right here next to me. Old Bessie. Let's get old Bessie going here.
Is that actually the name of your guitar? Because that's the name of my dog.
No, that's as Kit will tell you, I call everything old Bessie, if we're watching TV. Oh, time to fire up old Bessie, So
it's my mom's name too.
Really?
Yeah, not the old part, just Bessie.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Hey, Mom, you know what I'm calling you? So thanks so much for the opportunity to debut the song on Kernels of Truth. This is, and I guess we should say that this is something that I have done myself in support of the man who should be our next governor, who's our current governor, Andy Beshear. But this is not something that Progress Kentucky is doing, because we can't legally. But I, right, can't be campaigning. But
no, we totally can be campaigning. We're a
C4
C4 organization. We've got to walk through this one more time.
We'll
do it off camera. We'll do it off camera. Yes, we're a C4 organization, so we absolutely can endorse.
Can we cuss legally?
Legally,
I would like more cussing on this show, frankly.
Oh, the cussing.
Yeah,
legally. That's between us and YouTube, I think, or something. I don't know. But yeah, drop as many F-bombs as you like. I always check the "We are not a show for kids" box, because I would not want kids to try to watch this. Really.
I'm gonna make lesson plans for third graders with it.
So this is called "It's Andy for Kentucky." Kentucky, who's the one who cares about you? Who's the one who pulled us through? It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Who is there when tornadoes roll? Who's a friend to folks working coal? It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Who promotes our state's enjoyment? Who's at work for our employment? Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Who's got no time for fearful haters? Who respects our educators? Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Andy Beshear, the choice is clear. He has no fear. For all of us, he will be here. Woo-hoo. How about infrastructure? Who's rebuilding infrastructure, making roads safe for all our truckers? Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. And who is there when the flooding starts? Who is there with an open heart? It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. And who wants you to get public records? Who stands up for union members? Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Paying heed to science research and a deacon at his church. It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Andy Beshear, the choice is clear. He has no fear. For all of us, he will be here. Woo-hoo. Always leading by example. To him you can't hold a candle. Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. On in so many ways, who gave KSP a raise? It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. And who's the one who's landing factories, paving the way to EV batteries? Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for me. Who supports legalized sports betting? Who'd you like to have at your wedding? It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for Kentucky. It's Andy, it's Andy, sing along. It's Andy for Kentucky. It's Andy, it's Andy, it's Andy for Kentucky. It's Andy. It's Andy, it's Andy for Kentucky.
It's all coming back to me now. That was beautiful.
Deacon at his church, one of my favorite lines. Who's at your wedding? Also fantastic. And the factories to EV batteries, of course, that's my favorite because
Well, I have to thank you. Yeah, that's because that's you, Aaron. You came up. So I ran the lyrics by the Progress Kentucky message board, and hey, if anyone has any comments, and Aaron came back with the da 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 factories, da 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 batteries, and I chopped it up a little bit just to make it work, but that's totally Aaron in that song there. So.
But all the rest, all the other, how many verses? Like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, about 1,000, but who's counting?
It feels like 1,000.
I think we need to find a way to reference his awkward smile in photos.
Yeah, I don't know if that's so much
selfies.
of a campaign, selling point.
Have you seen the one of him in the helicopter and he's like
his marginal, suit fitting? Like, I don't know. This seals the deal. We are not going to get Andy on this show. Just no.
I think that if anything, that song will get him here.
It should. It is a glowing song.
Well, the lieutenant governor let me know that perhaps she and Andy have both seen my thirst tweets about him.
Wow.
Which brings me fear and
not
joy.
Helping the case, I think, Willie, is what's going on right there.
That's why you're blocked.
All right, so I think that's our show. I think we're going to wrap it up.
Yay.
All right.
What?
I am closing, I do believe. Progress Kentucky, which is a show you just watched, is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State and organized as a 501c4. We are affiliated with the Indivisible Project, the Commonwealth Alliance Voter Engagement, and are also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Make sure to join us next week, where we'll be covering the breaking news out of the governor's race and maybe even singing or talking about thirst tweets again. Production of episode 127 was by the amazing Annabel. And thank you, Nate, for the new song and theme songs. You can find more information and music at natosongs.com. That's natosongs.com. If you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook or YouTube, audio podcasts and our show notes are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you do listen to the pod, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening right now. Logo and some provided by Couchfire Radio.